Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Sprenger. I'm an academic trainer in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm excited to have Professor Edward Maggio and Professor Chris Canios here joining us today. We're going to be discussing the Depp and Heard trial today. So a couple of housekeeping items for you. We absolutely encourage you to have conversation in the chat. You are welcome to do so. If you have questions, we'd like you to go ahead and put those in the Q&A and we can get to those as time permits. As always, we are recording our webinar and I will post this in our CTL Webinars Resource Center. And we do have a public YouTube channel as well too. So this may float its way to there as well. We do have scrolling subtitles. Last piece here before I kick it over. If you want to see the scrolling subtitles, you can hover over the bottom of your Zoom and hit the CC option and hit show subtitle. If it's a distraction to you, you can also hide those subtitles and you can ask me questions about how to do that in the chat. I'm happy to help you if need be. So without further ado, I am going to give this over to Professor Maggio to kick off our webinar today.
Thank you, Emily, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm also excited today to present with Professor Canios as well. Everybody nod if you can see the screen. I believe we are good to go. So as discussed, both Professor Canios and myself will be doing a discussion analysis as to the Depp v. Heard trial. Some of the areas that we are going to cover will go through the development of this case, essentially how it reached this point, since there is quite a bit of history before it reached the recent verdict this year. We're going to discuss some of the more notable trial moments as well as the verdict and outcome. We're going to have a discussion as to the impact on the public, in particular live streaming and social media, as well as a discussion as to the impact of trial preparation and the role of lawyers with this case, as well as the commodification of public trials and the role that public plays in any type of trial of this nature. And finally, we'll wrap up with a period of question and answer. So please hold all questions to the end. Certainly post questions you have in the chat room so we can get to them when we get to the Q&A. And as always, mic etiquette, if you could be muted until called upon, we do appreciate it. Quick little disclaimer, the viewpoints expressed today by myself, Professor Canios, are ours and ours alone, not of NCU or National University, JFK School of Law, or any of the affiliate organizations, as well as I do use some photos which are being used pursuant to the fair use exception for educational purposes. But I guess to begin, essentially I like us all to start from a point of understanding. We need to remember that despite everything shown and covered by the media with this case and all the salacious details that, yes, myself and Professor Canios will discuss as it relates to these allegations of defamation between them, it's very easy to forget that Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard, they're people. You know, people are not perfect. And I'll be honest with you, relationships are not easy. You know, in particular, people being in toxic relationships in which there's domestic violence, mental health problems, addiction issues being present. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon in our legal system. As an attorney, I've spent enough time in family court to tell you couples with situations like this, with this level of hostility, is fairly common. The difference being that not everybody is a Hollywood super couple with, you know, the level of scrutiny that they are facing at present. With today, you know, our focus will certainly dive into those salacious details of what happened in this case, but we are going to put a strong emphasis and focus on the impact on our society from this case. And what does it say about society itself based on the strong interest and the opinions people have on this case and all of the participants? You know, as we'll uncover, this case was covered and viewed by a good portion of the American population. If you ask people, they generally have a very strong opinion one way or the other. Why is that? That's something we certainly will address. But with that said, let's get started. So how did this case develop? Previously, there was a defamation lawsuit against News Group Newspapers Limited, AKA you may have heard this, the Sun newspaper case, in which London's High Court of Justice deemed that the portrayal they had of Johnny Depp as a wife beater when he was going through his divorce from Amber Heard was essentially a truthful statement. And essentially, you may have heard how Depp lost the first defamation case. This is what they're referencing, the Sun case. This led to then the development of the case we have in Virginia, the big case that we're going to be covering today. And I know certainly, there was a big focus of how this came about. It originated from a op-ed that Amber Heard had made, and we'll also cover that she didn't specifically name Johnny Depp in discussing domestic violence, but it was very clearly implied that he was the one she was referencing in terms of her experience with domestic violence. This led to Johnny Depp and his legal team filing in Fairfax County, Virginia, and bringing this suit against Amber Heard. I also have there noted, because this is one of the big questions we get a lot, why was it done in Virginia if both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard live in California? The answer is because the servers essentially were in Fairfax County. All the as I have here, the online edition and the print edition of the Washington Post op-ed, which was the source of Depp and his legal team to pursue this case against Amber Heard, all the servers are kept in Fairfax County. Also, Virginia doesn't exactly have the strongest First Amendment protections. Specifically, for these type of cases, they tend to, favor the party that is claiming they are being defamed. And with that said, I think this is a good opportunity to reintroduce Professor Canios and allow him to go through a discussion of some of the basis legally for defamation.
Okay, so defamation is a very old tort action, an action for personal injuries. Nobody's going to jail. This is an action to get compensated when somebody feels that their reputation has been harmed. And they're looking for two types of compensation, as you heard about in this case. They're looking for those kinds of personal injuries that they suffered, the emotional distress, humiliation, being shunned by others. These are things that we're concerned about if our reputations get harmed, right? So this idea of our reputations is a very powerful interest that for centuries people have been concerned about protecting. Defamation also, so it's a very old tort, personal injury action. It's often used in the political arena. It has a long history of being used to stifle free speech, to smother criticism, so that, and to this day, it's used in that way. The threat of a defamation lawsuit has silenced many media outlets from running stories. Last year, I spoke to a local broadcaster here in the San Francisco Bay Area, who said that their team of lawyers constantly is putting the kibosh on stories that they wanted to run. Why? Because they may get sued for defamation and they don't want to defend it. And it's like, but it's a true story. It's really not defamation. Yes, but we don't want to pay $500,000 to you lawyers to have to defend us. So it still has this impact. Public figures and public officials in particular have been plaintiffs in defamation lawsuits. So what does it take? What does it take for somebody to win a defamation lawsuit? What elements of the law? What do they have to prove? So the first thing is they have to show that there was a defamatory communication, something that stated a false fact. All right, a false fact, not any false fact, a false fact that harmed their reputation, right? Classic defamatory statements would be if you wrongly accuse somebody of a crime, right? That's going to affect somebody's reputation. You accuse them of doing something very unethical. People have sued because they feel that there have been false statements about their sexual relations. And so it has to be something that falsely is a false fact. An opinion doesn't work. In the old days, it did. Modernly, an opinion is not considered a fact. An opinion is not true or false. You could say, Professor Kanios is the worst professor I've ever had in my life. If I sued you for defamation, the case will be thrown out of court. Why? Because it's an opinion. You're entitled to an opinion, right? On the other hand, if you stated facts, Professor Kanios never shows up for class. Professor Kanios never returns an assignment. Professor Kanios was drunk in class. Oh, that'd be a good one, right? That's obviously going to hurt my reputation. It hurts me personally, right? But it also could hurt me with my boss. So I could have these financial ramifications from the defamation as well. So you have to start initially with a defamatory communication. In the Heard case, Johnny Depp said that this op-ed piece presented a false statement of fact regarding him, that in fact he was a domestic abuser. And that obviously that would be something criminal, and it would be something that would harm his reputation. So what has to happen next? This false statement of fact, this defamatory statement, has to be published somewhere. So interestingly, if you're just one-on-one with somebody, you can say whatever you want. Okay, the essence of defamation is that other people have heard it. Other people have heard it. It has been published elsewhere, so that it's out there. And nowadays, with the internet, the audience for defamatory comments is just enormous. It's all over the world. So it's not like a little flyer floated in the neighborhood. These are statements that can go all over the planet. So it has to be published to another person. In this case, the Washington Post published this defamatory content, right? So that was an easy element to satisfy. It has to be of another element. It has to be of and concerning the plaintiff. So there's a small twist in this case because Depp was not specifically expressly named in that op-ed piece. But if a person would reasonably understand that the defamation was referring to a particular person, then the defendant is not going to escape because, well, I didn't name the person, but everybody knows who I was talking about, right? So in this case, that was not a bar to Johnny Depp's lawsuit. But the big issue modernly is this notion of malice, because both of these parties are public figures, they're celebrities. And since a famous case called New York Times versus Sullivan, law students out there would be interested in this if you haven't read it already. This was an important case back in the heat of the civil rights movement, where the New York Times was sued because they ran an ad that criticized Southern officials in Alabama for their treatment of civil rights protesters and for their treatment of Martin Luther King Jr. And the officials down there, a commissioner, a police commissioner, and some others, they sued the New York Times. They were going to get the New York Times, and they won. They won all the way up through the Supreme Court of Alabama. And New York Times was going to just about go out of business and go bankrupt, because back then, this was, they weren't in every state in the country. In any event, the United States Supreme Court took up this case, and they made an important decision that stands to this day. That's been talked about a lot, actually. And it basically says, if you're a public official, or it's been expanded to include public figures like celebrities, people who are in the public eye. If you're a public figure, you cannot recover in defamation unless the defendant acted with what they call constitutional malice. In other words, did the defendant know it was false? Because interestingly, the old rules of defamation, you could be reasonably mistaken. Oh, I was convinced Kanios was convicted of, whatever, tax fraud. It didn't matter. If you defame somebody, you were going to be liable. And that's what happened in the New York Times case. And the Supreme Court said, this is very dangerous for free speech. If we have media defendants who are running stories, meeting deadlines, and they're going to be vulnerable to these lawsuits without having proved that they did it with malice. In other words, did they know that the statement was false? That's the ultimate. The other way you can get it is through this recklessness. Did they act recklessly in not determining whether the statement was true or false? That's why, so that if they say the newspaper says, well, I'm not even going to look into it, I'll just run it. Well, no, you can't do that. You have to make some reasonable effort. Otherwise, you're recklessly running this story that you claim you don't know the truth about. So this is a big element here, constitutional malice. And because we know that both Depp and Heard were successful in proving at least part of their cases, the jury had to decide that they acted with malice. In other words, they presented this defamatory content knowing that it was false, right? And it's also this malice then that will allow the award of punitive damages. So tort law is primarily concerned with compensatory damages, compensating somebody for the harm that they suffered. But you can also recover punitive damages in some situations if the party has been able to prove this level of malice, right? And in this case, both parties were able to recover that. So the jury obviously found malice on both parties' behalf. Interestingly, I think that Depp was awarded $5 million in punitive damages, but the trial court immediately dropped to $350,000. I said, whoa, what happened there? What happened to my $5 million, right? Well, Virginia, like many states, since the last 20 years in particular, they have been putting caps on recoveries. They've been putting caps on punitive damages. So in this case, that's a pretty severe cap. That no matter how egregious the defendant behaved, no matter how malicious and how outrageous the defendant behaved, the maximum punitive damage that the plaintiff can recover is $350,000. So, and that's a big part of the case, proving damages. Proving damages. Can you show that the defamatory content caused this harm? So Johnny Depp is there saying, hey, I'm not getting roles anymore. Okay. Well, it was because of this, right? Well, you have to prove that. And that's often a very difficult thing to prove. So those are the basic elements. Those are the basic elements of a defamation action. And it's a very interesting area of law, very interesting area of law. Professor Maggio, you want to move into this?
Yes.
Okay.
Continuing on, now that we all have been presented a overview of the nature of defamation law, I want to build upon essentially the what happened in terms of in more detail with both sides that Professor Canios has discussed. Starting with Team Depp, as indicated, they sought $50 million. As already commented on, certainly Depp's position is the actions of Amber Heard in fabricating domestic abuse accusations impacted his career. In particular, as we'll cover later on, there was the discussion that Disney dropped him from his key character as Jack Sparrow because of the allegations made by Heard, as well as due to the Washington op-ed piece. Johnny Depp's legal team also argued that while Heard's 2018 op-ed did not mention him, it was clear by implication that it was referring to him. And also they went forward with the notion in their litigation papers that Amber Heard was the actual abuser in the relationship. In response, Team Heard filed a counterclaim and they sought $100 million. In particular, they made in their litigation papers known that there were allegations that Johnny Depp physically and sexually abused Amber Heard on multiple occasions, along with a history of serious addiction to both alcohol and drugs. There was a focus by Johnny Depp to essentially destroy Amber Heard's career. And with their counterclaim, they made the argument that Johnny Depp's former lawyer, Adam Waldman, was acting on Johnny Depp's behalf, making defamatory statements with malice about Amber Heard. Also, they focused on Amber Heard's right to express her views in the op-ed, which focused on a broad discussion of domestic violence. And since it did not explicitly mention Johnny Depp's name, they maintained the argument the op-ed was done with full First Amendment protections. Lastly, the allegations had not changed regarding Depp's reputation. Depp had instead ruined his own Hollywood career himself with drinking and drug use. This was essentially the main argument being made in particular by Amber Heard's team, which is, for those that watched the beginning of the trial, why the attorneys for Amber Heard made such a focus on the alcohol and drug use, to basically say he sabotaged his own career with his addiction issues. It had nothing to do with Amber Heard and the divorce or the Washington op-ed piece. Essentially, Jack Sparrow as a role was lost by Johnny Depp because Johnny Depp has his own demons, which he has to deal with. So the interest I want to cover immediately with this case was off the charts. As I have here, it was covered on the Law and Crime Network and then covered by other organizations. Viewership was 50 times higher than it normally is when this case was going on. Also, live streaming in a Virginia court has also been criticized because it's not common. And one of the criticisms that many of us have seen is, with all the videos that came out from the courtroom, you got to see the audience reaction, especially every time one of the attorneys either made a mistake or if the line of questioning did not go the way they wanted, they'd pan the camera and you'd see the people making O faces or shocked faces, as part of an audience reaction. That's been a huge criticism of why perhaps live streaming and how we do it perhaps needs to be reconsidered. But nonetheless, the case was live streamed. Furthermore, in a pretrial hearing, Heard's legal team tried to exclude the cameras. Depp's chief lawyer and his legal team as a whole basically welcomed the cameras. They said, look, we want full transparency. People need to see and hear. And certainly we'll discuss, was Depp's team correct in that approach, having cameras to his advantage in the courtroom? Also want to cover a little bit of social media. To give you an idea, and I was shocked to find this out, the news articles about this case got more attention than the leaked Supreme Court draft about Roe v. Wade being overturned or about the Russian invasion. So imagine that, the Depp case while it was going on was such a major global news story. Also, we have, we saw with trends on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, most supporters seem to be in favor of Johnny Depp with extremely vicious opposition to Amber Heard and her position. As far as videos, some metrics further, with the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp, it reached a point a little bit past the halfway mark during the trial, over 18 billion views on TikTok in terms of that hashtag floating around, which is, from a social media standpoint, is mind-boggling. So, as mentioned, and I dread even covering some of these areas, but what were some of those salacious, notable events that did occur during the trial? We learned about a conflict between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard in which he was injured and he discussed how he was painting with blood with his finger. There was an audio of Amber Heard discussing alleged harm from Johnny Depp, which was played in the courtroom. There was an image presented in which Johnny Depp allegedly received from Amber Heard a bruise. Johnny Depp, as mentioned earlier, he discussed why Disney cut ties with him, which he made it very clear was related to the Washington op-ed piece by Amber Heard. There was audio played from her discussing that no one will believe Depp's claim of abuse and that she hit him on a previous occasion. This is that famous audio bombshell. That was a major news story where if you heard the news, it's her saying, "I didn't punch you, I was hitting you," which did not go over well for the Amber Heard legal team on that day. There was also a video played of Johnny Depp saying, "You want to see crazy? I'll give you," you can fill in the word as far as explicatives, "I'll give you crazy," which also did not look good, along with Amber Heard's attorney asking questions if Johnny Depp drinks mega pints of wine. There was a whole discussion as to his drinking and drug use, which then led to a further discussion as far as his drug use with celebrities, including Marilyn Manson. There were pictures shown of large quantities of marijuana. There was discussions by Johnny Depp of his past history of trashing hotels. There was then also an incident involving concealer. Amber Heard's legal team even had a witness, makeup artist, testify that previously any abuse signs, i.e. bruises on Amber Heard, she would use a concealer to cover it up. In particular, the concealer manufacturer, Milani Cosmetics, came out and said there's no way that our concealer could have been used during the time period she claimed because it didn't exist. So that was another major point that worked for Johnny Depp's legal team. There were also texts revealed in which Depp referred to Heard with, I put it diplomatically, disparaging language. I don't want to rehash what was said. You can Google it. It's quite heinous, some of the comments he made about Amber Heard via text. My favorite incident, I have to say, was Muffingate, for those that followed the Depp case. This is when Dr. Shannon Curry faced strong opposition from Amber Heard's attorney, Elaine Bredhoff, who's trying to get Dr. Shannon Curry disqualified, making the argument that she broke her confidentiality as to when she interviewed Amber Heard for a diagnosis by the argument she told her husband. So Elaine Bredhoff for Amber Heard was trying to make this argument, oh, you told your husband about the muffins because you had your husband get the muffins. So you would have told him you were going to see Amber Heard, so you can't be trusted. And it went through, you can go on YouTube and see the clips. It gets ridiculous to a point that even Dr. Curry said, can you please stop asking me about muffins? You know, it was not the best lawyering, to say the least, if you watch the exchange of what happens. We also had the incident in which the security guard, Malcolm Connolly, he was asked a question by one of Amber Heard's attorneys, which for the law students here, this is a perfect example of why you don't ask a question on cross-examination that you don't know the answer to, and try to make the security guard claim that Mr. Depp was naked and acting uncontrollable. And then he asked the security guard, well, you must have seen him naked. And it turned into laughter in the courtroom, in particular the photo I included here, where in a British Scottish accent, the security guard made the statement, I think I would have remembered seeing Mr. Depp's penis, sir. And it just exploded into laughter because the attorney looked foolish going down a line of questioning. He didn't know what the answers were going to be. We also had the famous Camille Vasquez cross-examination of Amber Heard, which if you watch Camille Vasquez do that cross-examination, it is textbook. It is on point. She is unemotional. She accomplished everything she needed to do and did, in my opinion, she did some serious damage to Amber Heard. And certainly it's what now Camille Vasquez is one of the most notable attorneys right now in the country because of her performance of that cross-examination. And lastly, and I hate to bring it up, but it's going to be brought up anyway, there was the allegations that Amber Heard left fecal matter in the marital bedroom, in particular the marital bed. So with things like this coming out during the trial on a daily basis, certainly this helped this case get even more attention beyond the fact that Amber Heard and Johnny Depp are Hollywood celebrities. So let's talk about the verdict. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury, as Professor Kanios noted, this was a mixed win situation. The jury did find that Depp had proven all the elements of defamation for all three statements from Heard's 2018 op-ed piece, including the statements were false and that Heard defamed Depp with actual malice. The jury originally awarded $10 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive, but as Professor Kanios correctly stated, it was reduced, which is fairly common, down to an amount of $350,000. That's due to the limits imposed by Virginia state law. As to Heard's counterclaim case, remember she was seeking $100 million. The jury did find that the second of the three contested statements that Depp's former lawyer, Adam Waldman, had published in the Daily Mail, they found that to be defamatory and false, and that Amber Heard was defamed by Johnny Depp's team with actual malice. Regarding the other two contested statements, the jurors concluded that Heard's attorneys had not proven all those elements of defamation for those other two contested statements. She was awarded $2 million in compensatory damages, but nothing punitive. So again, both sides essentially won, something as far as a part of their case, with Johnny Depp winning more as far as the counts of his original complaint versus Amber Heard's counterclaim. At this time, as we dive into discussion of, some of these factors of how the outcome and the verdict reached this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Professor Canios and get his views as to how trial preparation really had an impact on this case.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. As lawyers watching these cases, so we have a hard time watching movies that are about the law in the courtroom, because we're constantly looking for the mistakes they make or how the underside of things. But watching this trial, I think many of us, I don't know, I haven't seen any polling, but I think many of us felt that Amber Heard's legal team was weak and that they had poorly prepared her for this trial. And on the other hand, Depp's team seemed to be very capable. And most importantly, in my mind, Depp was totally prepared for this trial. So what, I don't know, most people, when you're a jury in a case and people start testifying, you say, okay, well, here's this person and he's just talking. If it's an important case, even if it's not an important case, every lawyer is going to go over that testimony with his or her client. You want to know what that client is going to testify, how they're going to testify. If they start answering about things that you do not want out in the courtroom, right? You talk to them about that. So this rehearsal with your client is an integral part of lawyering. It's considered what you should be doing to prepare for trial. And I think that Heard was not given any kind of advice on how to present herself in a credible way, how to explain some of these inconsistencies, instead of letting her try to defend herself as if she tried to explain it, it would be worse. I mean, this whole thing, like with the donation, the whatever, the $7 million donation, all she had to do was really explain that was fully my intent to do that. And then when I got hit with this lawsuit, I realized, and all my accountants and financial advisors told me that I would be destitute if I did that. And I was hoping to do it once I was whatever, right? Just some kind of explanation that would at least sound credible instead of, oh, no, I did. Like nobody prepared her for that. And it made her look terrible. And there's several instances like that, in my opinion, that good preparation would have saved her from the bad reaction that the jury obviously had towards her. On the other hand, Professor Maggio, I was wondering if another reason that the Depp team wanted to be in Virginia was for the jury pool.
It's funny.
These are Southern folks.
It's funny you mention that.
Yeah,
you beat me to the punch.
Folks.
For those that don't know, I actually live in Northern Virginia. So the courthouse is about 20 minutes from me. During this trial, I'd go to the Sheetz gas station sometimes in the morning and see people waiting, at the cashier dressed as pirates because they're going to go see if they can, get down to the courthouse and be let in. Spoiler alert, court officers are not going to let you in dressed as a pirate. But you are correct that I believe there was a as far as the, skipping ahead to forum shopping, there was an advantage of bringing the case here in Virginia because juries, for the most part here, are more conservative. And even some of the local commentary here, as the Depp case was moving forward and Amber Heard got to testify, a lot of people in Virginia, calling the radio stations or TV shows, voicing their opinion, very conservative stances that, hey, we don't fully believe everything she's saying. Do we think bad things did happen to her? Absolutely. But do we think she had more of a role in this in terms of her hitting him and her being abusive? Yeah, we're leaning towards that now. So I do think bringing it to Virginia, for a conservative jury pool certainly was a factor that they must have considered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are all critical decisions that legal teams need to make. And it shows everybody that there are so many factors involved in litigation and in trial practice that do not have anything to do with the truth, that don't have anything to do with seeking justice.
The same goes with, I don't know if you want to comment as far as the evidence that was excluded, because there was evidence that Heard's team wanted to bring in, which on pretrial motions and everything was excluded, which compared to the case in London, that also was, it negatively impacted the Heard team.
I remember the exclusion of some evidence. I don't remember which was the most damning. I don't remember what piece was the most damning that was excluded. This is something that happens at the start of the trial, that both of the parties, they can make a motion to the judge to say, the other side cannot admit that evidence. Well, what do you mean? Well, it's too prejudicial. It may have some relevance, but it's just too prejudicial, and it has the jury looking at other factors instead of what they really be needing to look at.
And that was a big issue. I'm glad you brought that up on that audio clip where she's saying, about the hitting and the punching.
Yeah,
that was one when that was allowed to come in. They knew they were going to have as far as the Depp legal team, they were going to have a leverage now, because when that came out, that did not look good, because it changed the narrative. It went from her original position as I'm an innocent victim to, wait a minute, this seems like a more complicated marriage in which both parties were not engaging in the best behavior.
That's right.
That's putting it diplomatically.
Yeah, and these decisions, these court decisions, the judge makes the decision about the evidence. These decisions about evidence are classic decisions that are used on appeal. Because if it was a mistake, if the judge should have allowed it, or if the judge should have excluded it, and that decision adversely impacted a party, if it would have made no difference, then it doesn't matter. But if it could have made a difference to the jury, that's one reason that one of the ways that parties go up on appeal and argue. So, whether a jury gets a very broad picture of everything that happened or a very narrow one, just depending upon the decisions of the judge in the trial, is an enormous issue and can have an enormous impact on these cases. In criminal trials, evidence of prior criminal acts, if somebody's being charged with burglary and we know that this person committed 6 burglaries in the last 10 years, is that relevant? Well, I think it's relevant. I think, in all honesty, as a human being, I would say, wow, this person seems to have something going on, right? But it's considered so prejudicial to this first part, the case we're looking at right now, that generally it's not admitted unless it shows some kind of,
And I think with this case too, Heard's legal team, they really wanted to bring in all the history of all the police contact in California and in New York and wherever they, were traveling as part of their lifestyle. And that was basically like, well, no, this is going to be dialed into only evidence related to defamation. We're not going to bring up, every incident. And I think that's why out of the gate, Heard's legal team, they really tried to dial in on Johnny Depp with, you used cocaine and you used alcohol, you used marijuana. And they kept bringing that up over and over. And you could see when they panned to the jury during the live streaming, you could see they were kind of getting annoyed, like, Mr. Depp's already admitted, yeah, he's used all of it. And, even the judge at one point, counsel, he's answered that, move on. Like, it came off poorly when you're trying to portray him as an alcoholic drug abuser when he's already admitted it, and he clearly was very well prepared to answer those questions.
Yeah.
And I'd also add, going to the quality of representation, what made this difficult for Heard's legal team is, as mentioned, they made some mistakes. It's one thing, you do a trial, you make mistakes. We're all human as attorneys, but it's another when you make a mistake and you're being live streamed, and now you have a full audience that everyone's like, oh, and they're making O faces, or they're cheering for Johnny Depp's legal team. And they would pan the camera and you see the jury, and the jury would see that. They would see the audience reactions to whenever Amber Heard's legal team made a mistake. I couldn't imagine, doing a case where everything I'm doing is not only being scrutinized by the judge, who I'm more concerned with, but I got to deal with an audience in the courtroom, and I've got to deal with an audience at home. And knowing that the jury is being aware of how this case is being perceived, even with jury instructions to limit how, they view information, that all has an impact when we're talking about that quality of representation combined with the technology impact.
Yeah. And I think that this is another issue as far as the effect upon the decision, the effect upon the participants, the lawyers, and the judge when a case like this, which is so so much coverage, is live streamed. I cannot remember another case that would have had this level of attention publicly since the O.J. Simpson case.
This is Professor Canios, this is a good opportunity for us to move on to. We've got that next slide as to the commodification, which I know you've got some great points here that you got to share with us.
This is a serious issue. People know, for instance, that the Supreme Court of the United States has resisted countless efforts to have their proceedings televised. You can hear audio. Every argument going back 50 years, 75 years has been audio taped, and you could actually hear the audio arguments. But nobody's that drawn to that. People want to see the video. People want to see the people arguing back and forth. So for reasons being concerned about the effect of the cameras on the participants and the arguments being made, the Supreme Court does not allow televised stuff. Now we see this has become a whole industry, and there's the television stations dedicated specifically to it. They are making bank over their advertising by televising these trials. This is not, oh, we want to get the truth out to the public. This is, we got something here that we could really make money on, right? Some of it could be fascinating, but a defamation trial between previously married people who apparently both behaved horrifically and are now presenting really false images of themselves, is what it appeared like to me. How is that really furthering, the interest of society? It's entertainment. So this has become entertainment. And it shouldn't surprise us, because gossip, which can include a lot of defamation, when people gossip about other people, you could be sharing some defamatory stuff, false statements of fact about somebody, right? Gossip is like totally entertaining. That's why nobody could keep a secret, because it's so, right? There's something about it. It goes back centuries. There's references to gossip mongering in the Bible. It's just this ancient practice, but it is entertainment. It is sport. It is entertainment and sport. And for, I think, a lot of us, it was rather painful. And I'll say this, for me anyway, it was painful to see a human being, and in particular, Amber Heard, absolutely crucified, in court and in social media, right? And for whatever mistakes she may have made, and as if there were these intentional lies about everything. Well, you could look at all of that stuff where Johnny's sins were just, well, Johnny went through a stage and now he's fine, so we defend him no matter what. To me, it was just amazing that the impact that social media could have in really, and we know this from cyberbullying, for instance, the effect they could have on harming people. So using the lawsuit as a commodity to be sold to advertisers, and using it as entertainment or sport to get more and more viewers. I think there's something concerning about that, because I think it has a very serious impact on how these trials are conducted, how they are presented, and what happens.
Yeah, look at, for example, a number of the people who testified in this case, especially the medical experts on both sides, ended up having the public going on to, like, let's say their WebMD page, posting negative reviews to impact them. You don't see that with many cases where the public now is taking it upon themselves to punish participants in this case. I also want to, we've talked about, you and I privately about as attorneys, if we were kind of talking to the Depp team, we'd almost be like, hey, look, we're halfway through this trial. If your goal was to show that Miss Heard is not the saintly person that she's portrayed to the public, you've accomplished that. Do you really want to keep paying us and take this to the end, or do you want to call it a day? And I think I'd probably end up having that talk if I was his counsel. Like, do you really want to make us rich, the attorneys? Because the money, the 350, really, that's not going to help Mr. Depp's bottom line.
Right.
But I do think it was a mission, essentially, him and his team, that like, look, we are going to take this to the end, and we are going to demonstrate that, Ms. Heard has lied. And I don't know, and this is something maybe on the Q&A we can get into, because I know we have a couple of faculty here. I don't know if the level of involvement between the Depp legal team and how social media really developed with such vitriol hate towards Miss Heard across all the platforms. Essentially, she became the villain du jour during this trial every day.
Yeah, I don't know enough about this aspect of things, but it's apparent that there was an enormous, organized, calculated movement of social media to absolutely bombard the social media with the Justice for Johnny movement. And I think you raised some interesting points, especially I think for law students out there anticipating working on cases. How do you counsel someone who is interested in bringing some lawsuits that perhaps, whether it's this one or another one, but perhaps that you feel would be detrimental, that you feel would not be in the best interest of the party? Because we know, unfortunately, that Johnny Depp, or Amber Heard for that matter, but Johnny Depp, let's say, in bringing this, he's not here to get compensatory damages. I don't believe that's his main goal, right? His main goal is to punish Amber Heard. He wants to punish somebody, right? And by insisting on this being televised, this is part of the package. Organizing and having the social media campaign to trash Amber Heard. This is all part of punishing somebody. That's my view. Now, if I'm on social media, I would have 10,000 people now tell me how wrong I am, how stupid I am, and didn't you hear the testimony? She's a liar. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I think people forget she did win part of her counterclaim.
Right.
They both had a win.
Right. But so, and I guess maybe for non-law folks or whatever, courtrooms that go back thousands of years, to at least 2,500 years, I know of, in ancient Greece. Courtrooms, jury trials actually were conducted. This is part of a so-called civilized society, so that disputes are not handled with clubs, right? Or vigilantes, that disputes are resolved in a courtroom. But now, and that's a great, important thing, to have a peaceful forum where disputes could get resolved. But what it means is that the anger and desire for revenge or punishment, it comes into this different arena. And instead of clubs, people are bringing in lawyers.
Yeah. And in this case,
a bigger army than you do, and we're going to win this battle.
Yeah. And you can even make the argument, the social media, the public perception, they really became like force multipliers for the Depp legal team.
Yeah.
To really, use it to their advantage. Yeah. I know we're getting close to the end. I think we've got about 15 left, which is perfect for us to, as I like to say, go down the rabbit hole and open this up to Q&A. Emily, I'm going to stop the screen share and we can open this up to our participants.
Absolutely. And I'm going to start with, I'm just going to kind of go back and forth, if that's all right. I'm going to start with Professor Kanios. Okay. Do you know if the jury was sequestered? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Mr. Maggio, do you?
I don't believe they were sequestered.
Okay.
Virginia, very often, unless there is a security threat or, there's a major push that the case is being negatively impacted by the influence of the public, they're not going to sequester them. So I don't believe they were in this case.
Oh, okay, and this is going to be obviously a personal opinion, this next question, and I'll kick it off with Professor Kanios again. Do you believe that the ruling was rendered appropriately? And is there anything that you would have considered separately or any other argument that you think that would have been beneficial on behalf of?
Well, I wasn't there.
Okay, yes.
I wasn't there, so I really am not an expert on the weight and strength of each side. However, I would say this. I think this is such an inappropriate case to go to trial that I would have wished the parties were able to go to mediation and try to settle this amongst themselves, somehow even possibly, remotely possible. You can imagine it now, but would it be remotely possible for them to even have some kind of reconciliation through that process, right? Instead of having what happened happen in front of our eyes. And I think given the evidence presented, I could imagine the jury making its decision. But you can give a different jury the same case and they will decide differently. That's just a part of the jury system, part of the jury trial system. That it's one of the reasons people settle cases, because you cannot predict what a jury is going to do. And you may be confident that they're going to go one way and all of a sudden something else happens. So I'm not sure. I don't think it was necessarily some kind of miscarriage of justice, where a totally innocent person got sent to, the gas chamber. But I would have preferred to see this resolved in a much different way. I'm actually very saddened and kind of disheartened that this is the way the legal system is being portrayed as this circus, as this effort to completely annihilate each other in court. And I know, and Professor Maggio is right, the attorney, Camille Vasquez, did a excellent job of picking apart the points of Amber Heard. But I personally, I don't think you need to do it in that manner. I don't think you need to do it in a exceptionally harsh, critical way. Yet that's being held up as, she's going to become a partner in a firm now because she did such a good job publicly annihilating another human being in front of millions of people. That's how you get promoted. And there's something that I'm not sure is right about that. I understand it. I have to reflect on my own conduct in litigation,
Right.
Sometimes. And I tell students that, you may be on the wrong side of a case someday. And it's important to think about how you yourself conduct yourself. And those are big issues.
Thank you so much, Professor Kanios. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Maggio?
In what aspect, in terms of you got a couple of points on there that I want to make sure.
I know. Well, I guess going back to the original question of do you believe that the ruling was rendered appropriately, or would there be anything else that you would have considered separately?
Think the judge and the jury, under the circumstances of this case, I think they did the best they could to follow the law as what was presented to them, and to really the judge ran a tight ship as far as focus on the jury instructions, focus on what I'm telling you, do not let what, as these jurors left the courthouse every day, you got people dressed as pirates and cheering, and, it was a huge media event. And, I do think, based on the facts presented, and as interpreted based on, not only the witnesses, but the way the attorneys conducted themselves, I think the outcome was as sufficient as it can be under the circumstances.
Thank you so much. And then this has actually come up a couple of different times in the chat and the Q&A. So I'm just going to kind of summarize them into one piece. And I'm going to start with Professor Kanios. Should the audience have been barred, in your opinion, to minimize the influential effects of the jury? And it kind of goes to Dr. Maggio's point is, people were dressing as pirates in the actual court. What are your thoughts on that?
As I think I don't there's some cases that may be of really great importance to society. They're getting decided that would be really valuable for everybody to hear the arguments and to listen and learn about the case. This was not one. And I think that it should not have been streamed. I think that it just blew the thing out of the water, and that's how you resolve cases in the courtrooms, and then just do it there. But I think it was a huge mistake to put a case like this.
Yeah, and I'd also add, regarding it also being a mistake, as I mentioned before, the audience reaction, Johnny Depp being as prepared as he was by his legal team, used that extremely effectively. And you can see that even in the first few days of the trial, where Amber Heard's legal team, they would do a lot of objections, some of which were relevant, some of them had no basis. And even Johnny Depp would be like, let me guess, objection, hearsay. And you'd get the audience laughing and making O faces. And the jury is seeing that, like, hey, you know what? The people are behind Johnny Depp. The people realize Amber Heard's attorneys are making mistakes. Look at them react. I do think it had an impact, having that audience that essentially was consistently reacting in favor of Johnny Depp. And then you're in the jury box seeing that. It has to have had an influence. And again, even though they have that jury instruction that you can only make a decision based on that which is presented and that which you hear during this trial, that still has an impact when you go back to make a decision during deliberation.
Absolutely. And I think simply, maybe not so simply, I think Johnny Depp is a much better actor than Amber Heard, because I personally believe that he was putting on a significant performance for the trial itself, and for the media, and for everybody else. And here is somebody who has a history of absolute violent, wild, outrageous behavior, a lot of horrifically misogynistic stuff, that, he's now the Southern gentleman. And that was his job, to present himself as a Southern gentleman who had a minimal amount of some remorse for what happened, but all of these things just never happened like that. And the Amber Heard's team was not effective at all in reminding the jury about individual specific things, one after the other, that they could have tagged him with.
Yeah, and I'd also add, Professor Canios, what you made a great point earlier about damage control, and that some of those things, like let's say she did hit him or she did defecate in the bed, they could have had direct testimony where she could have explained, look, I felt powerless. I had incidents where I engaged in behavior I'm not proud of because it was the only way I felt I could deal with this domestic violence situation I was in. They could have done a better job on direct damage control rather than have those bombshells come out, which did serious damage to her credibility.
Absolutely. And so she was presented in a light that was so far from any kind of sympathetic light of being somebody who would be subject to he could be subject to her stuff, but to have her so far removed from any kind of sympathy, empathy relating to somebody who is this young woman who is like in this marriage with somebody who is doing all this stuff, and explain why somebody in that situation may react the way they would, instead of trying to deny every disagreeable thing that she did. So I don't know enough, I'm not impressed with either one of them, to be honest with you. But I honestly do think that Depp put on a performance. That's my opinion. I think he put on an excellent performance in order to win his case. I I think Amber Heard put on a terrible performance. But that's what, it's the theater of the courtroom. The courtroom is an amazing theater.
And I think that's a great endpoint, because this really was, a theater, two major actors on the world stage with the social media and public viewing onward.
Absolutely. And I think, I know that we got to several of the questions in the chat and just a couple in the Q&A, and I do know that we are at time. What I'd like to do is, if there are some additional questions or you want to have a follow-up conversation, please don't hesitate to email me and I can get that to our presenters today. And then, of course, the comments. You're welcome to go into the comments and just kind of pose a question, and we can have some dialogue in there too. But interesting case discussing defamation, and I really do appreciate Professor Maggio and Professor Kanios coming and presenting for us today. And I hope everybody learned a little something and walked away with some things to ponder, whether it comes to law or court or jury selections. Any other final thoughts, Professor Kanios or Maggio, as we wrap up?
I guess my final thoughts, I would say, I was very concerned with how this case, especially for women, are going to be perceived coming forward when it comes to domestic violence, or even how we handle viewing mental illness. I did not appreciate the social media commentary, or even the news commentary, how they were very vitriol in terms of discussing, different mental illness, which I don't think benefits society. We finally are reaching a point in our society where we realize, mental illness can happen to 1 out of 2 people. And it can happen to all of us, and we should be supportive, versus I do think it was weaponized in this case. And then the news media really took it further. That's a whole nother discussion. Maybe another idea for our next lecture, but I'm going to leave it at that and let Professor Kanios make the final comments.
No, I just rehashing a lot of this does make me sad that I think that the trial did not serve the public interest other than crass entertainment. And I'm sorry that these folks had this experience all out on the public like that. It was not a shining moment for the American system of justice. That's my opinion.
And thank
Well
you
said.
so much for that. Absolutely. Absolutely, Dr. Maggio. And thank you so much, Professor Kanios and Dr. Maggio, for your insights and just your thoughts on this case. I think it's still
you can email us. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
My email is just emaggio, EMAGGIO @nu.edu.
Yes, and mine's ccanios@ncu.edu.
edu.
Although I don't know if it's been moved over. I think NCU
we're at
or
NU.
NU will both
Yeah,
work.
it
They'll
should.
both
Your
work, yes.
nu.edu should work.
Yes, they'll both work.
Well, if anybody sends it to an email and it comes back, use the other one.
I was going to say, absolutely. And thank you so much for everybody's time today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending.